Welcome to the Pharma Source podcast. As everyone knows, the world of contract development and manufacturing is going through an extremely interesting phase right now. Every day, there seems to be another huge acquisition, investment, or legislation. In the US, there are highly significant changes working their way through Congress. We track CDMO news daily on Pharma Source, but it's helpful to get some perspective on what this all means. So, we've turned to one of the most well-connected people in the contract manufacturing space, Gil Roth, President and founder of the Pharma and Biopharma Outsourcing Association, to give us his take on what these changes mean to this dynamic sector. If you want to get more insights, then don't miss CDMO Live in June, where Gil is delivering an expert talk and sharing his insights on how the upcoming US election and legislative changes could impact the CDMO sector. To make sure you don't miss out, register at pharmasource.global/CDMO Live for your free ticket.
The Pharma Source podcast is sponsored by Thermo Fisher Scientific. Thermo Fisher Scientific provides industry-leading pharma services for drug development, clinical trial logistics, commercial manufacturing, and clinical research. They partner with customers in the pharmaceutical, biotech, and life sciences industries as their trusted CDMO to deliver medicine to patients faster.
On with the interview. It seems to be such a frenetic time right now in the contract manufacturing space, particularly in the US. I mean, there's been so many big changes, whether that's at a governmental level. There was Biden's State of the Union address where he claimed he had success over big pharma, whether it's the Biosecure Act. There've been some huge acquisitions in the space. Before we dive into all of those different things, Gil, just interesting to get your take on the year so far. Does it feel like 2024 is dramatically different to previous years? I mean, it seems like such a dynamic, moving market at the moment.
It sure seems to have accelerated in a big hurry. Even DCAT week, which was just a few weeks ago from the time we're recording, it feels like it's been about 2 months, just with everything that's gone on since then. I'll say, for having the big event kicking all this stuff off of the Novo Holdings acquisition of Catalent, which is expected to close later this year, monumental, seismic, and something that, I've looked at being in the space for the past 25 years. We haven't really seen a deal of this magnitude in this direction. We've seen large scale CDMO acquisitions, but they tend to be by related companies, something like Thermo Fisher Scientific acquiring Patheon. In this case, having a pharma company and its holding group acquire a CDMO to make some of its capacity captive, that's a very different proposition, and one that I think is, we'll say, historically exceptional or an outlier based on the sheer unprecedented weirdness of Ozempic and Wegovy and that whole GLP-1 market, with the commercial prospects for it, the need for a very particular type of manufacturing, et cetera.
I heard it referred to as a gangster move by someone. It seemed like a bolt out the blue.
It was pretty huge, and it speaks to the commercial prospects of that class of drugs, that the money that could be coming in first to Novo and to Lilly, as well as other companies that are trying to get into this space, is just so massive that it really changes the calculus of the make versus buy decision.
Yeah.
And so, that's a significant jump start to the year, but we've seen some other moves and deals take place, as well as policy related activity. That
pretty much every single day there seems to be another facility changing hands or big investment levels. It really does seem like there's so much going on at the moment.
Yeah, earlier this week we saw the multiple deals involving Recipharm, where they carved out their oral solid dosage business, and that Baseback, the respiratory business, is also moving out and standing on its own. Again, significant deals, a lot of changes of understanding of what someone's core competencies are, even from a CDMO perspective. There's a lot going on in the space. We're gratified that, especially involving the Novo Catalent proposed deal, that there's still so much sterile fill finish capacity, particularly in the U.S., either coming online, just online now, or proposed for new development. So it's not one of those instances where this will suddenly create a desert of fill finish capacity. There looks like there's a lot of significant CDMO opportunities out there to help pick up the
Yeah.
slack and as new drugs come into development.
Why do you think it's all happening at once? Is it a case of the COVID was such a unique period of time and then the rebalancing after that, and now finally investments back? What do you think's underlying all of this?
I think for the CDMO capacity side, there's a longer timeline. So a lot of those investments were made either pre or during COVID. Some of them were actually spurred, like Jubilant Hollister Steer has talked about. Their expansion of their sterile fill finish capacity comes from or is partly financed by US government investment. So we're seeing some of the fruits of investments that were made during the pandemic era when there were questions about how much capacity is there, what is available if we need this sort of capacity for a major operation like Operation Warp Speed again. Um, so we're seeing in the sort of fixed capacity space more the again coming to fruition of investments that were made in recent years.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to investment in R&D, which is the thing that ultimately serves as the lifeblood for the CDMO sector, it's still the jury's still out as to whether that money is starting to come back in yet or not.
Mm-hmm.
And I've
Mm-hmm.
been trying to get a gauge of that, particularly in conversations at events like DCAT Week and upcoming conversations at Interfex. Um, the change of inflation and interest rates really altered the calculus for a lot of venture capital investment in startups and early stage biopharma. And the lack of money going into that space has caused some hiccups or at least slowdowns for some CDMOs that are reliant on early stage work progressing through their pipelines.
Mm-hmm.
There are some indications that money's coming back. I'm still not getting a clear, definite signal, so the magic 8 ball is still a little bit hazy.
Yep.
I'm hearing more of late stage funding. Phase 3 and commercial products seem to be getting the money. It's still a question about sort of the preclinical IND phase 1 into phase 2. Once that money really starts coming back, we'll have a clearer idea of how healthy the overall CDMO sector is going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Done on the acquisition front. Big tick.
We're never done on the acquisition front.
Any forecast for what might drop next?
Oh, no idea whatsoever. That's sort of the fun of this industry. Nobody tells me that, hey, we're actually looking to sell. It just surprised me when it happens, and I have to figure out, if it's a member company, whether they're going to be paying their dues next year or not, which is always a challenge. But it's the nature of this sector with so much private equity investment. You do have these 5 to 7 year windows for a lot of these companies to either resell, merge with another firm, or otherwise fulfill the terms of the venture fund that acquired them. But yeah, no predictions. But I anticipate change going forward.
I guess taking a step back from it, if you're trying to sort of nurture your baby molecule through the pipeline and you're looking at a contract manufacturing space that is changing so fast and potentially looks uncertain, do you think that's going to become a consideration for people and thinking actually, if we did this in-house, at least we know we won't have to tech transfer in 2 years because we're going to get bought out by someone else? Do you think that could become an issue?
I don't think that's as significant a concern. And I think it's still the investment required for startups to put together the bricks and mortar to actually do this stuff would still be orders of magnitude greater than the issues related to, our CDMO got acquired and we have to meet some new business development people. Because the acquisitions tend not to mean the product goes away. The instance that's proposed with the Novo Holdings and Novo Nordisk deal with Catalent, again, is an outlier where it looks like capacity may become internal after a few years. For most of these situations, it's just, merging in and maybe you're getting different set of capacity or you're becoming part of a larger organization that your CDMO is now belonging to. So yeah, I don't think that will be as great a concern. I think, historically, customers do have to have some due diligence just as to the health of the CDMOs that they're working with. But I don't see that as a something that's going to change the overall make versus buy decision.
Okay. Let's move on then. Let's talk about the Biosecure Act. That came within a month, I think, of the Novo Catalent acquisition, or the announcement that Bio were going to be part company from Wuxi or vice versa.
It's a whole complicated thing.
Yeah. Tell me about it.
In fact, it came up last year in something called the National Defense Authorization Act, which is sort of a must-pass bill that Congress does each year, again, for funding national defense. And it was stripped from the final bill last year, so it did not make it into law, and got reintroduced this year. And things escalated in a hurry. That things got real weird, real fast. I don't know details. All I know is what's been made public, where we've seen that companies like Wuxi and its subsidiaries and a few other China-based, not just CDMOs, but also equipment makers and other service providers were explicitly named in this legislation as companies not to do business with if you are accepting U.S. taxpayer money, which would be any pharma company that is selling drugs through Medicare or Medicaid or some other government programs. Honestly, when I saw it come up in January, I did not think it was going to happen, just that it might move the window in terms of what, might happen in relation to U.S. law regarding some Chinese China-based CDMOs. And then, like I say, things change in a big hurry. We've seen the news reports about these things. We don't know how accurate any of those are, relating to potential IP theft by Wuxi, which they deny happened. We saw Bio initially come out, the Bio Trade Association or organization come out against Biosecure, and then 2 weeks later announced that Wuxi was no longer an affiliate member of theirs and that they are now in support of Biosecure. In fact, just yesterday, the president of Bio put out an opinion piece in Stat, once again supporting Biosecure and going a little bit beyond it in terms of the importance of domestic biomanufacturing and other aspects, not just of protecting genomic data, which is where Biosecure seemed to begin, but moving into this larger biomanufacturing sphere. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that is intended to signal. I don't know what Congress is going to do. We know there's the Senate version of this bill, and bills need to be passed by both houses of Congress. Usually they reconcile the two if there are differences. If it passes, it goes on to the White House to be signed. The Senate version was marked up a month or so ago, and during that process, they, rather than ban all companies that get U.S. taxpayer money from working with Wuxi, it said they would grandfather ones with existing contracts, but it doesn't really clarify what that grandfathering entails, whether renewal of a contract counts as something new, whether issuing a new purchase order counts as no longer grandfathered. So it's not quite clear if that's the version that ends up getting adopted, or if the House ends up marking up their version and there are subsequent changes, how it all gets reconciled. But it does seem much more likely to happen than it did in January, when one of my members said, "Hey, Gil, what's up with this Biosecure Act?" And I said, "Well, yeah, well, I don't think it's really going to go anywhere, but we'll see." Now it looks like it's going somewhere. And I try and read tea leaves. I work with our lobbyists down in Washington to get some ideas to whether there's something happening behind the scenes. And it's just not clear. But there are additional sets of concerns beyond the initial, Wuxi-related legislation, which would be further response by China, what it means for customers of Wuxi if something like this goes through, and they need to find new CDMOs and CROs throughout the world, what that's going to mean.
Potentially that could have a huge impact, if nothing else, on costs, because you'd think that the costs of manufacturing or parts of manufacturing being in China versus in the US?
I assume there are other reasons. Yeah,
Mhm.
sometimes it's market access, sometimes it's a risk diffusion, risk mitigation plan in place. Let's work with companies in different regions. And as we know, Wuxi isn't simply operating in China, leveraging those costs. They have operations in the U.S. They're building in Europe. Those things wouldn't have the same cost structures that what we historically perceive as operating solely in China.
Mhm.
It is interesting that we see a lot of the press around this, keeps focusing on the potential of India and companies in India to replace some of those services
Mhm.
if this all goes through and everything happens. Again, all of this is speculation. I don't have any insight particularly. It's just observation from reading these news pieces and talking to some CDMOs. But yeah, it looks one of the effects of this seems to be a potential for Indian market to grow up around some of the areas that Wuxi currently
Yep.
operates in.
Yep. That would make a lot of sense. And there's no risk of India one day ending up on the Biosecure Act as well.
The bill is written in such a way that it does name those companies explicitly, but also leaves open the ability to name other companies of concern. And it
Mm.
does not say that they necessarily have to be in China. So, again, if the bill goes through as it's currently constituted, keeping in mind this is historically one of the least productive Congresses of all time because of uh, various issues related to how the U.S. Congress currently works, especially the House of Representatives. Um, the chances of something actually getting done, are not 100% by any means. But yeah, any company could end up on this list if there were, I imagine, IP related concerns and some of the issues that biosecure raises.
Mhm.
But yeah, it creates uncertainty for sure, and it's unclear as to how much the customer side is factoring it in, how much they believe this is going to happen and are preparing for it. Um, I'm not getting a clear gauge from CDMOs that, oh my God, we're being overwhelmed with requests from current Wuxi customers that they now need to have us as a backup. I have not heard that
Mm.
sort of thing yet. By the time this airs, that may have
Yeah.
changed, but like I say, it's a very fast moving and fluid situation. It's a question of what companies' reactions are going to be, what China's reaction could ultimately be. Um, so yeah, it's interesting times.
I've certainly heard from a few people who say that they are, let's just say, very busy since the announcement. There's definitely lots and lots of conversations going on at the moment, trying to figure out what's going to happen next.
Yeah, just handicapping it, and then figuring out if it goes through in one version versus another, what that means
Mm.
and what it's actually going to entail for the tech transfers that could take place. Keeping in mind that part of the Catalent Novo deal, again, if that goes through and if those three facilities that are supposed to become part of Novo Nordisk do wind up becoming captive capacity for Novo Nordisk, those are also an existing base of sterile fill finish customers that would need to look for other CDMO providers too.
Mm.
Um, so it could, again, create a circumstance where we have a lot of companies that are looking for either backup supply or the potential to move to a new CDMO for a lot of operations.
No, very interesting. So let's stay on Capitol Hill then, and what people are starting to call the Innovation Reduction Act. What's the latest with that, Gil, and what kind of impact do you think IRA is going to make?
From a CDMO perspective, not a first order hit.
Mhm.
It's the initial reaction by the innovators who would have drugs that could potentially become part of the Medicare price negotiations. Uh, some of them some of them announced R&D cuts within one day of the IRA, which I really feel was more of this was an unproductive branch of our pipeline. Let's just blame Biden
Mm.
for it and write this stuff off. But there's also been talk of not pursuing certain indications with some products because it would open them up to negotiation too early. They would rather not prevent breast cancer for the sake of getting an extra year or two of revenue. according to a published statement by one large biopharma
Okay.
company, which I would have advised against making such a statement publicly, but nobody asks me. Um, but yes, the optics of that don't look good. Um, but there has been a lot of I don't want to say debate, but a lot of activity going on around prices for drugs in general. Besides the
Mm.
IRA, we've seen insulin price caps come through. We're now seeing it with inhalers. The lead of the Senate HELP committee, the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Group, which is the committee of relevance for pharma and FDA,
Okay.
is Senator Bernie Sanders from Vermont, and he has been very strongly pushing for more price caps for different types of drugs. Um, President Biden pushed not just to have the price negotiations only done within Medicare, but pushed out to the private market. Those things would require a lot of congressional heavy lifting. And again, very unproductive Congress right now. We'll see what the next 4 years are like. But,
Mhm.
you know, it could impact certain R&D decisions. We haven't seen, exactly what that's going to entail yet, and those things are long tail in some respects. I remember before my time, I came into the industry in 1999, but before then, the original Hillary care, the Clinton care
Mhm.
stuff from the healthcare reform in the early 90s was. We'll say it was perceived as chilling enough that a lot of major pharma companies cut back on R&D thinking that price controls were coming. Merck went off and bought Medco so they could get into drug distribution, to basically spread their or to diversify their interests. Um, there was no immediate impact of that, but 5 to 7 years down the line, that's when the R&D pause ended up becoming meaningful.
Mm.
Nothing happens immediately, but again, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years down, that's where the pause in R&D ends up, you know, becoming evident, where things were never pursued. So your phase two pipeline doesn't exist because a lot of compounds simply weren't pursued in the time it would have taken them to be developed, formulated, et cetera. So we'll see if there are real R&D cutbacks now or not, and what that's going to mean again 5 to 10 years down the line.
What else are PBOA members talking about at the moment? Are there any challenges, concerns, or opportunities which you're hearing from your members?
I think one of the areas they're concerned with, we know, and this ties back into sort of government policy issues, and to biosecurity to some respect. Um, Congress and the FDA want a clearer idea of where drugs actually come from
Mhm.
and what the supply chain really looks like. Because FDA has an inventory of all the facilities that are used for innovator, biologic, generics, et cetera, but they don't have the which ones are being used at any particular time, what volume of products is coming out of them. And in 2020, with the CARES Act under COVID, FDA was given this reporting authority so they could push companies by facility to disclose what finished product and what API they're making and what the volumes of that have been. It took them a while to put out guidance. It wasn't good guidance. They revised the guidance, still not great. Um, and they're not getting a great degree of compliance with this. It's only, they've said about, I think, 44% of facilities responded in the first 2 years of reporting. They want more reporting authority. They want drug labels to include API sourcing info.
Okay.
They want more stuff reported by almost every step of the supply chain and controlled by the label maker, in this case, the drug companies or the license holders themselves. Um, it's complicated. They want data that CDMOs aren't necessarily allowed to disclose, but they want the individual facilities to do the disclosure, not the owners of the drugs.
Mm.
And it creates some tension. There's, since we've come into existence, we've helped educate FDA, and this has been 10 years now since I launched PBOA. We've helped educate FDA about the role CDMOs play and things we can and can't do. And there've been some greater understanding of that. In some cases, there are still these blind spots where they just use the term manufacturer interchangeably between the license holder and the actual manufacturing
Hmm.
facility. The White House just did this week with the Department of well, with HHS, the health department. They have a drug shortage proposal that just refers to manufacturers and isn't clear as to whether it's referring to license holders or facilities, but wants every facility to be rated for its manufacturing resiliency, and creates a set of
Mm.
incentives for hospital buying groups. It's a convoluted Rube Goldberg-esque machine they tried to propose
Hmm.
with this, and yet at the center of it they have a number of fallacies, a number of flawed premises. The lack of an understanding of what a manufacturer is, and b, the premise that hospitals want to pay more for drugs, they just don't know which drug supplier would be higher quality. Um, my belief is that the hospitals are not looking to pay more, they're just looking to assure quality, and if they can't get assured quality, they just drive everybody else's prices down. But we're just the CDMOs. We don't have any say about the whole pricing and reimbursement setup. But anyway, this was a policy or a proposal put out by the White House that, while well intentioned, demonstrates that they really hadn't listened. Because I've met with some of their people to explain what the CDMO sector is versus what the innovator or the license holder side is, and this just blows right through that. And to us, it's a really key distinction, and making sure all of your stakeholders are clearly defined is a very important part of trying to fix what's going on with drug shortages, especially in the US.
Yeah. Why do you think this administration is looking to introduce so much new regulation and seems to be going fairly aggressively at the life sciences sector? We beat big pharma, was what Biden said.
Something that just kills me. I get it's a good populist statement to make, but to me, the combination of big pharma and the CDMO sector and startups, essentially pre-revenue companies like BioNTech and Moderna, without them, we all helped save the world.
Hmm.
And then within 2 or 3 years to turn around and you know, treat it as though this industry is just well, this industry needs to be beaten, though the way we beat big pharma formulates it. Um, yeah, to me, it's not a great way to frame things. It's not a great way to build those, as they try to put it, public-private partnerships that are going to build resiliency. Make sure that we're all working together for the good of the patient ultimately.
Yeah, yeah. 2024 is a big year in terms of elections around the world. I think there's more elections in democratic countries this year than anywhere else in the globe. In the UK too, thankfully, we're not sure yet in the UK when we're going to get a general election, but it's got to happen sometime between now and December. Luckily, at least in the States, you know exactly when yours is. How do you think that could potentially change things? You've got the two old guys running for each party. What impact do you reckon that could make, whichever way it goes, on the CDMO sector?
Yeah, I don't handicap things particularly, but it's questions around in this case how either party would approach pharma, how they would look at the area of onshoring, which has become, even before the pandemic, was being looked at in terms of having secure supply chains. With the Biden administration, we saw a significant infrastructure investment. We saw the CHIPS Act, which is putting about $53 billion into domestic manufacture of computer chips. Would we see something similar related to pharma and to the manufacturing part of pharma? There have been discrete moments where they brought up the Defense Production Act and using BARDA and Department of Defense authority to move funding to expand domestic production capabilities for essential medicines. It's unclear as to whether that there's an appetite for that sort of investment when it comes to pharma. At the same time that this administration is talking about beating down big pharma, the previous administration, which is again, running for office anew, has talked about trying to do a most favored nation pricing agreement as they proposed back in 2020. Trying to convert U.S. drug prices to an average of the best deals given to 7 European or 7 non-U.S. markets. So there's always a drug pricing aspect to both parties. It's a question of how they want to pursue it. When it comes to investing in domestic manufacturing, if there is a parallel to the CHIPS Act being considered, we want to make sure that they keep in mind who has already made the investment in the U.S., what companies have already built a manufacturing base, and not just throw hundreds of millions of dollars at companies that have no track record and would be essentially, trying to jump ahead of the people who've actually made the commitment to manufacturing here. But as I say in all these presentations, as I'm sure I said in the last time we talked, everybody has a shore. It's Europe is trying to build up its API manufacturing and trying to do their version of a critical / essential medicines domestic supply. India, as we mentioned, is trying to build up especially its API business, but also its higher value biologics space. One of the things that I was gratified by with the new Congress was that they were much more cognizant that making everything domestic was not feasible, or making everything domestically was not feasible. That the friend shoring, trusted partners, et cetera, those are much more, we'll say feasible when it comes to building a reliable and robust supply chain. That trying to put everything into the U.S. is not a recipe for success and potentially could actually create more fragility in supply.
Fascinating. This is obviously something that you'll be talking more about in June when we have CDMO Live.
I hope, yeah.
So I don't want to steal all of your thunder. And by June, I imagine, hopefully it'll become a little bit more clear exactly, certainly the way the polls are going, or maybe not, but it should be a very interesting conversation to have.
I figure, given how insane the first 3 months of 2024 have been, we've got about 2 more months till we're recording to CDMO. I expect to see a lot of changes take place in the next few months, and I'm sure there'll be plenty to talk about. But like I say, the huge uncertainty is what happens in November. But there are a number of legislative uncertainties and policy questions taking place right now that affect both pharma and the CDMO sector. So, I'm really looking forward to talking with your audience about this and really just trying to get a clearer idea of how every one of the stakeholders involved is perceiving the risks and potential benefits and how they're working to leverage them.
Thank you so much. Fascinating conversation as ever. Thank you for taking the time today.
Thanks so much, Lou.
As mentioned, Gil will be joining us at CDMO Live in June, where he'll be delivering an expert talk about the upcoming US election and the legislative changes which could impact CDMOs. Sign up today for your free ticket by heading to pharmasource.global/CDMO Live. And thank you to Thermo Fisher for sponsoring the PharmaSource podcast.